Hey guys. So today we're going to be talking about something a little shady. So as we've been talking about the Gilded Age, we've talked a lot about business and industry and immigration, but today we're going to be looking at the politics of the Gilded Age and kind of some of the issues that surrounded that. So we're going to be focusing on something called a political machine. So political machines were basically the organizations that ran city, local, and sometimes even federal governments during the Gilded Age period. So when you think of a political machine, basically what you're thinking of here is kind of like a gang, right? So think about gangs today. Today, your gangs are going to be running illegal businesses, right? Maybe prostitution or running weapons or drugs. But during this time period, the gangs seemed a little bit more upfront, at least at first. These guys are running like the legit businesses, mostly the government. So the gangs are basically running the government. But here's the thing though, they're running the government for their own self-interest, right? Not for the benefit of society or for the people. They're running it for the benefit of themselves. So that's just kind of the thing about where we are, right? So this is not an illegal business, but it is a kind of a corrupt government system, okay? So the first thing that political machines need in order to function is money. There's a couple ways that these guys can do that. So the first thing that they would do is something called grafting or padding the bills. So grafting in general is a term for really any way to kind of get money in a roundabout way. So here's the way they would do this during the Gilded Age. So your politician, probably your political machine leader, is going to come to the citizens of New York and they're going to say, we need to build a new library, right? That seems legit, right? Let's build a library. Well, taxpayers pay for the library. So here's what they're going to do. Political machine boss is going to go to their buddies who are contractors and builders, and they're going to give them the contracts in order to build this new library. And those contractors are going to overcharge, right? They're going to tell the taxpayers it's going to cost us $3 million to build this building, when in actuality, it's only going to cost them $1 million to build the building. But the taxpayers are going to pay that $3 million. So what do you do with the extra 2 mil, right? Well, you take that money and you split it in half. The builders get 1 million. The political machines get 1 million. The builders stay in business because the political machine keeps, hiring them to do things. And the political machine gets buddies in high places. So if they ever need a favor for something, they can go to those buddies, right? So the taxpayers themselves, you may wonder, like, well, don't they know this is going on? A lot of them do. But here's the thing, they've been really intimidated by the political machines, and they're kind of afraid that something could happen to their families, or maybe they'll lose their job and not be able to get another one. So there's a lot of fear that goes into these political machines and kind of how they run. The other way that they would do this is just straight up bribes, right? So basically, here's what would happen. Let's say you need to go get a license for something. Maybe it's a license to build something, or maybe even like a driver's license or a license to run a business. Well, if you've ever been to the DMV, you know that there is a huge amount of wait. So let's say you're trying to get a license to build a building and you're sitting around City Hall and there's a million people there and you're going to be there all day. So you sneak on up to the counter and you say, hey, I got a present for Boss Hogg, right? So you give Boss Hall a little bribe, and Boss Hall is going to put you right in front of the line to get your license. Well, maybe while you're building whatever this building is, this business is, you want to build it as cheap as possible, right? So you don't necessarily build your building to code. You use cheaper materials, maybe materials that are not going to hold up as well. But your building's got to pass inspection. So you go back to Boss Hall and you say, look, when the inspectors come to check my building out to make sure it's in code, if they could just miss a few things, right? Maybe they can pretend not to see something, right? So while they're doing that, they can do these inspections, and the inspector's going to be like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Everything looks good. Sign off on the paper. And whatever money those inspectors might have gotten as a bribe, they would kick it back to the political machines as well. So there's a lot of changing of hands, with changing of money, changing hands here in order to pay off the right person, right? To get the job done you need to get done at the most effective way possible. So these political machines had a pretty intense organizational structure. So you're going to have a guy at the top. This is going to be your party boss, right? The party boss is basically in in charge of the political party. Most of these political machines were associated with a political party, right? So the party boss is going to be associated as the leader. Maybe they're the actual person that's getting elected. Maybe they're kind of the man behind the elected official, so they don't necessarily want to be the elected official themselves, but they pull the strings of an elected official, right? So this is going to be the guy that's the head honcho. He's getting the main cuts, but he obviously can't run his whole business because he can't be everywhere at once. So he sets up these ward bosses. And so the ward bosses take different districts, right? And each district has a ward boss who's going to kind of make sure everybody in that particular district stays in line, right? This is going to be the guy right under the party boss. So he's going to answer back to the main boss here. But those ward bosses, again, they're not going to be doing the dirty work, right? These are still guys high up in the structure. So what they need are precinct captains. So they break it down a little bit further. So the precinct captains are the ones that arrange all of the dirty stuff, right? The stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Maybe it's an illegal fight. Maybe it's betting. Maybe it's the bribery. Whatever the dirty work is that's going on. These are going to be the guys that kind of run that. And the precinct captains answer to the ward bosses, right? So they're, again, high up in the structure, but not as high as the ward boss. But they depend on two people. First, they depend on the common people, the citizens of the city, right? So these are the guys who are being taken advantage of, particularly by the political machines. But these are the guys that are going to be working in their factories. Maybe the political boss in some factories, so they're going to be working in the factories. These are the guys going to be voting for the people that they want in office, right? These are going to be the people that are paying the taxes. So these are important people. They're low people, but the political machine depends on their work and their money, right? Or their vote. Now, the businessmen are the ones who want the government contracts. They're the ones who give in the kickbacks, right? The guy who's building the building that wants the inspector to look the other way. That's basically what these guys are doing, right? So this is kind of the breakdown of the structure here, but it all goes back to this party boss, right? So again, these are political people. So they are getting into office, or at least they have somebody that they're putting into office, right? So they get votes primarily by taking advantage of immigrants, okay? So you land in Ellis Island. You get off your boat. You go into New York City. You don't know where you are. You don't know anybody. You don't know the people. And all of a sudden, somebody comes up to you and says, hey, man, you know, welcome to the city. You need a place to live, right? Look, I know this great apartment complex. You can get it real cheap, right? You need a job? Look, I know a factory who's hiring. I know the boss. Let me take you in. Let me get you. And then, election day comes. Hey, man, you know, I got you a job. I got you a place to live. Let me take you to the voting booths, right? Now, today, if you go to the voting booths, there's a secret ballot. Nobody can go in there with you. You vote for whoever you want to. You put your card in the machine and you're done. There's no secret ballots during this time period. In fact, for some times, if you wanted to vote, basically you would just get a colored chip, so think like a poker chip, and you put it in a big wire cage for which party you wanted to vote for. If you wanted to vote for the Democratic Party, you put in a blue chip. If you wanted to vote for the Republican Party, you put in a red chip, right? So you're being taken to the voting booth by the precinct captains or by the ward bosses, right? You're going to vote the way that they want you to. You're not going to question it, right? Especially as immigrants who you don't have anybody else to go to in this country. These are the people who are taking you in, right? There's a lot of intimidation that's put in by this. That's why the secret ballot came into practice, so that they could vote, so people could vote for who they wanted to vote for, and the political machines didn't continue to get their those votes. The other thing that they would do is actually commit fraud. They would pad the voting list. So the political machine members would get dead people's names, the names of their dog, right? They would just make up names. They'd add them to the list of registered voters. And then, you know, they could keep going back to the voting poll. Maybe you wear a different hat and you keep going back, or maybe you bribe the guy at the voting booth and you keep voting under these different names, right? So one guy can vote 3 or 4 times under the names of people that don't even exist, right? So Chicago was one of the big cities that had a lot of these political machines, and there was kind of a phrase in Chicago where if you're voting, the phrase was vote early and vote often, right? So keep going back several times a day and you can vote under these different names. this is one of the reasons that ID laws became a thing for voting. So being able to actually have a identification when you go in to vote with you. So that's kind of where that idea comes from. So just a really great example of this during this time period is a political machine known as the Tammany Hall political machine. And it was run by a guy named Boss Tweed. Okay, so Boss Tweed was the party boss. And he's pulling all the strings for Tammany Hall, but the legit front of Tammany Hall was the Democratic Party, right? This guy was the guy in charge of the Democratic Party of New York City. And the Democratic headquarters of New York City is where all this shady stuff was going on behind the scenes, right? So this is all going on in these cities, and a lot of people are too intimidated or just ignorant of the fact a lot of this stuff is going on. So there needs to be somebody who comes in to expose this, and that is going to be this guy down here. His name is Thomas Nast. So Thomas Nast works for the newspapers, and he's a cartoonist. And what Thomas Nast realizes is that in order to get the information out there to the common people, you can't do it in these big, lengthy articles because most people in this time period can't read and write or can't read well. So especially immigrants, but also just some people who've not been educated. So what Thomas Nast does is he draws these cartoons in order to raise awareness of the things that the political machines that we're doing were bad. Because a lot of these guys are like, he got me a job. Why wouldn't I vote for him? He got me a place to live. So they're trying to show the other side of this, the corruption that's going on, the money that's changing hands behind the scene. So if you look at the cartoon on this page, this is a Thomas Nast cartoon, and this is a representation of Boss Tweed, right? So Boss Tweed is a big, fat guy. So that represents a couple things. First of all, it's who he actually was. You could recognize him easily because they draw him that big. But the other thing that they did with this is it represents wealth or abundance, gluttony, right? Like you're greedy and so you're fat. So this is a representation of Boss Tweed, but rather than his head, he's just got a money bag for a head, right? And it's just letting you know in a really easy way that this guy is controlled by money. He's not thinking about you, he's thinking about the cash, right? So Thomas Nast was really prolific and really got a lot of the word out there to a lot of the common people on why these political machines were a really bad thing. And here's really the thing to come back to with these political machines, right? It's going to take people who start to reform a lot of these laws and things that are going on here to fix these problems. So in America, most of these problems are gone, right? But that's not true. A lot of these same problems exist all over the world today in countries like Russia, Afghanistan, a lot of the African nations. They've got this really unstable democracy where money changes hands by the people who are in charge. And so these countries get stuck in this corrupt democracy and they can't get out of it. We were lucky that we had some really good reformers who came in and were able to change some laws. And we're going to talk more about those in our next unit. But at this time, in our country, or in our world today, this is still a major problem. And it's still going on in a lot of countries. So this is still an issue, and it's an issue to kind of stick with. So this kind of wraps up our look here at the shady dealings of the Gilded Age. What we're going to see as in our next unit, as I said, we're going to be able to shed some light onto kind of some of these issues that were going on and be able to solve a lot of these problems through political and economic reform. So I will see you next time.